Hi all, good afternoon, so you can hear me, right? um, my name is Afzal. I work for Deutsche Telekom, a corporate island IoT creators. Everything all right? Can you hear me? Yeah,
I
okay.
can't hear you. Oh,
You can't hear me. No,
oh.
I think that's correct.
Okay,
You
right.
can't hear me. So I will try to speak very loud.
Okay.
I hope that's fine for you as well. But welcome all, warm welcome. I see some familiar faces. I also see some fans of Jason in the back. We are going to talk about the influence of LoRaWAN on citizens in cities, which is also a new topic to me, to be honest, but we'll get back to that. Let's do a first introduction round. Gary?
Hi, so I'm Gary Howell. I'm an IoT practitioner in Wales in the UK, and my last 4 years I've been helping local councils, local governments with their IoT plans.
Hi, I'm Jason Legget. I work for a company called Connexin. We're based in Hull in the UK, and we're an altnet, but we are specialists in IoT solutions as well, and I head up the public sector and enterprise team within the business.
Hi, I'm Caruana-McManus, co-founder of Meshed. We have supported this event from day one. We've been working with the Thing Stack for 9 years, based in Australia, and we're now pushing our solutions into the US. LoRaWAN Managed Solutions.
Great, thanks for the intro. So let's start with the first question. And you know, I'm not a LoRaWAN guy. I mean, I have some customers using some LoRaWAN services, but my journey in IoT started in cellular connectivity, and that's also what I'm selling today. But every time when I ask the people who are part of, like, let's say the LoRaWAN ecosystem, which integrators are doing huge stuff today in different areas, different industries. And for the last 3 years, people always mention Connexin. So I want to start with Jason. Can you tell us a little bit about, with LoRaWAN being more or less 10 years in the market now, how much influence do we have on cities and citizens today?
Well, I've been with the business a year, and before that I worked in City Fibre in a fibre business. One of the things that really struck me working in the IoT space is that it's really starting to mature in the UK. I think we've all known it's been around for a number of years, but what we're seeing, particularly in the public sector, local authorities, combined authorities, governments, departments, recognizing the real value of this technology. And it's complementary for obvious reasons, and one of the things we're here today talking about is ultimately, you know, we're lobbying more and more people in the UK to champion LoRaWAN or LPWAN technologies because of their complementarity to other types of network. And one of the things that we're doing really is working with local authorities across the UK, primarily in Hull, in Newcastle, Sunderland, Sheffield, Coventry. But our work with them is about, first and foremost, demonstrating the value of connectivity for sensors, and then also working with them very much about the data that we pull from that data set, as it were, and combine it with their data that they've already got. I can talk more about that later on, but that for us is our core focus as we work with local authorities across the UK.
And that's your focus, but what do they experience? What is the feedback?
I have to say that it's different at different parts of the country.
Yeah.
What you're seeing with this maturing market is most local authorities have had some kind of experimentation. There's a huge amount of pilot activity that we see across local authorities in the country. The challenge with that is obviously it's almost a process of cookie cutter as another project with air quality, another project with, you know, heat sensors, light sensors, whatever it might be. The real challenge is moving them to scale. And I think one of the problems that we've got is we need to kind of get behind, you know, the promotion of this as a platform and the value of it as a technology, and by sharing best practice more across all of the local authorities. Because the problem they've got is they're hugely conservative. They clearly don't want to waste their money, but what we're demonstrating through these various pilots around the country is they're making real traction and getting real evidence back that they can work with. So it's about scale, really. That's one of the biggest things we're experiencing, moving local authorities from pilots to scale.
Okay, and before diving into the challenges of scaling, anything to add, Gary, on the current state of LoRaWAN for citizens?
Yeah, well, I can only talk from my work in Wales, and over the last 4 years, a number of councils have started proof of concept pilots with sensors using LoRaWAN. And unfortunately, most of the councils are still at that proof of concept stage. They seem to be unable to scale, and that's mostly due to issues within the council, perhaps not supporting the technology. However, there's been a number of interesting developments, particularly in Wrexham. You may have heard of Wrexham because of the Wrexham football. There we've started to move out of proof of concept into more pilot stage, but not really into production. So rather than a handful of sensors, we're looking at several hundred sensors for different types of applications. And I think in terms of the citizen benefit, it really depends on the project. So when I first heard the question, I thought, well, where do we really go in terms of citizen benefit? And I think there's some direct benefits and also some indirect ones. So as an example, some of the projects that we've done in Wrexham are what might seem like a trivial one, which is monitoring moisture levels inside flower beds. Well, why would you want to do that? Well, part of one of the reasons for using LoRaWAN and the sensors in particular is to try and regenerate the economy. And part of that is bringing in people to the town to spend their money. So the trivial example of monitoring flower beds has multiple benefits. One is that as a direct benefit, the people watering the beds can water them properly and correctly so that the flowers bloom well, and it's a nice view for people to see, and it attracts people to the town. So in terms of economic regeneration, it attracts people to town, and they start to spend the money, which helps everyone. Some of the indirect benefits, more to the council, but also has a benefit to individuals, citizens, is the council saving money. So again, back to the flower bed example, the cost of deploying the sensors is quite small, but it means that out of the, I think it's around 60 flower beds around the city centre, the person watering the beds actually saves 4 hours or 50% of his time by only watering the beds that need watering. So the flowers look better, he spends less time doing the flower watering and more time doing other, probably more important things in the city to make it nice. And in addition to that, they also save a lot of water. So we're talking several thousands of litres per day, which is also a benefit to the council cost-wise, but also to the environment as well.
Okay, and something that I always wonder, if we put citizens aside for a moment, right? Do you believe that there is enough awareness among the local authorities, like globally, about all the possibilities of all the very cool IoT solutions that are on the market today? Do you think that there is enough awareness?
I don't think so, no. At the moment,
okay, very curious now.
Yeah,
we'll come.
So in my experience, certainly, the individual councils tend to work in silos. There is some sharing of best practices, but because most of them in sort of proof of concept, they're not ready to scale. So one of the things I try and encourage them to do is do case studies, even if they're not shared publicly, but to share within the council to show best practice. And where there's a good use case, like watering flowers or antisocial behaviour type stuff, they can show a cost benefit to other councils who then will hopefully follow suit. But I do think there needs to be some coordination at government level, whether it's UK or Welsh government level, to coordinate this approach to basically it's a spend to save type policy.
Catherine, what about you?
Well, we've been working with cities for 9 years. Prior to setting up Meshed, I was the head of IBM Smarter Cities for about 8 years. We've got 70 municipalities as customers, mainly in Australia and New Zealand, but we've also got customers like Singapore. And in somewhere like Australia, we actually, because we're part of the Asian region, we actually look to places like Singapore and the Middle East for leadership around smart cities, but actually we've become leaders in smart cities. The Barcelona World Summit on Smart Cities, which I've attended every year since it was incepted back in 2010, it's happening again in November, is a fantastic think tank of everything globally that's happening in smart cities. And in the last 2 years, there's been a huge focus around the Internet of Things and AI, and that's how cities are sharing information. If I was to look at the current state, when we first started 8 years ago, we were lucky to have, say, maybe 6 or 7 sensors. Now, in my business, we have a catalogue of over 400 sensors. They fall into 3 categories, being smart cities, which is your pedestrian counting, street lighting control, smart parking, asset management, which is your remote asset management, so that's like your facilities management. And then the 3rd category is environmental management. So what we've seen over 8 years is a huge shift from proof of concept into those 3 categories. And originally, a lot of the cities that we engaged with wanted to use real-time data to engage around economic development, because every city is competing with another city. There is a huge rivalry between Sydney and Melbourne, right? The fact is that Sydney-siders never go to Melbourne. They just don't go, whereas Melburnians go to Sydney, right? And so those cities are always looking at ways in which they can improve the customer experience. But what I've seen in the last 3 years, our customers are actually the head of operations. They're the people responsible for keeping the streets clean, for ensuring that facilities are well maintained, that people don't have accidents. So they're really mission critical areas of the city, and that's where we're seeing a lot of traction. And then I also think that the whole environmental piece has been huge. The fact that cities now have to report on their environmental measures is also a huge driver in the adoption of the Internet of Things. And I think the other thing too is that we look globally to see where there's traction, where these things work. And we're now leveraging that experience that we've had with 8 years with over 70 cities to now, for example, do projects with New York City, which we're about to start, simply because we've been able to show years of experience in proving the test case. Doesn't need to be proven anymore. LoRaWAN is a very strong, stable, scalable technology, and I believe that it's still on the rise of opportunity, just in that sort of context.
So one thing that really surprised me was because you were just emphasizing the maturity of LoRaWAN, and 2 weeks ago when we were preparing the session, I was surprised when I read the title, LoRaWAN for Citizens, because I was always told that private LoRaWAN networks and enterprise LoRaWAN networks are usually being deployed in very specific areas, like buildings, industrial areas, or maybe farmland. And today we're discussing like citywide LoRaWAN coverage, right? So is this something upcoming, or is this already happening since the early days?
So, if I can use our example, one of the key strengths of our approach to building LoRaWAN infrastructure in the UK, and we call it critical infrastructure because ultimately we see the long-term value of this. This is not just about a single use case, but multiple layers of use case. We're working very closely with water utility businesses in the UK, and we're securing contracts with them to help them with their smart metering, which I'm sure is a solution that is already deployed in many other parts of the world, but it's really starting to be driven now through the regulation in the UK. So we've got customers who are signing up and using our infrastructure. That gives us that anchor tenant model and allows us to build out the LoRa network. But the real value of that is on top of that is you've the networks there then for other organizations, groups, whoever that may be, citizens, and indeed, large cities in a sense, to use that infrastructure. So my role within the business is to work with my colleagues to look where we have our infrastructure, engage with local authorities and targets within those groups, in those areas, and demonstrate really the value of that network that's there, waiting for them to capitalize on. And that's part of that whole process of communicating and raising the awareness of the value of LoRaWAN as a technology.
Okay, thank you. A few minutes ago, Jason, you were also speaking about the challenges of scaling. Can you tell a little bit more about that?
Well, briefly, one of the things that we've experienced as we work with local authorities is they have the passion and the interest because they've seen the value of the use cases. They've seen best practice, whether it be at Barcelona or or any of the other events, and they want to adopt that, and they want to achieve the savings, reduce their costs, as Gary said. The problem they've got is they're very risk averse, and the way that they approach their IT infrastructure is hugely conservative. They purely want to protect their assets and their individuals within the local authority who are liable for kind of making sure they're GDPR compliant, making sure that data that they hold is secure and safe for obvious reasons. But the real challenge for them is managing or wrangling that data. So what we've done with a number of local authorities is, before we even get into a conversation about data and additional data sets like sensors, is help them come to terms with their existing data. So we've built platforms and solutions to pull all data out of existing legacy systems, label them to pull all that together and analyze, and then overlay that with additional input and data. And that works really well to enable them to get into a comfortable place. The challenge we also have is there's a huge demand for data scientists in the UK at the moment, and there's not enough of them out there to go in and help the local authorities, be comfortable working at this level with data. So I'm sure Gary's experienced similar things, I'm sure.
Yeah, the data analysis the councils in Wales haven't reached that point yet, but they will do, and analysing the data and integrating it with other data sources is important. You probably won't know that Welsh Government have actually got a platform called Data Map Wales, and it's mostly used for councils, and they have things like school opening hours and where rivers go and road plans and that sort of stuff. And I think overlaying some of the sensor data, as you mentioned, on top of this is going to be really fundamental in terms of making changes.
And you just, Catherine, mentioned something about your customer is usually the head of operations of the organization, right? Is that maybe the magic trick to avoid resistance and to speed up adoption?
Absolutely. We don't work with IT, and they're just not really relevant to the conversation. The other thing too I need to sort of outline, like the US, Australia has like heaps of local government authorities, but we have 7 states and territories, and within each one of those states and territories are very large government agencies responsible for infrastructure in cities. So some of our other customers, for example, are the heads of transport for New South Wales, the heads of emergency services and the heads of environment. What's really also exciting has been over the last 5 years in Australia, we've appointed chief data scientists for all of the state government agencies and state authorities. So what that means is that they've built very advanced digital twins. And so we've got examples across Melbourne, Sydney and Brisbane where our cities who've deployed their managed LoRaWAN using Meshed and the Things network, that data is being ingested into real-time web portals and digital twin. And so what we can see is the benefits in real time of this data. And I think that's where it becomes really tangible. If people see smart cities as some esoteric project that's been done in the back blocks, you're not going to get the support. What's really important is for the data to speak for itself. And I think that's where the power in cities becomes where the data sharing happens. We also spend a lot of time doing MOUs between cities, universities and industry to share that data because there's no point in duplication. And so, particularly in the environmental space and in the asset management space, it makes perfect sense that we start to share things like urban heat monitoring, flood monitoring, air quality, and that to me has been the driver for the support and the funding in these projects. But luckily also for us, some of these authorities are semi-quasi-government authorities. They're more privately funded, which means that we can do projects very quickly, get them to a certain level, and then they can scale from that without having to go through really lengthy, processes and things like that. But being very respectful of government processes at the same time.
Sounds very interesting. I have like dozens of more questions about this topic, but we have to move on. And actually, you started about digital twins and AI already. And that's actually a nice link to my last question. Can you say something about the future of LoRaWAN for citizens?
Yeah, I certainly can. I think what we've seen is certain local authorities leading. I think that the idea about a chief data scientist has tickled me a little bit. I think it would be amazing if our local authorities in the UK would recognise the value and appoint a C-suite level kind of data scientist, because we know how data is going to transform public services in the next 10 years, but it needs to be at that very highest level. I think is what you were getting at, Afzal, earlier. Our engagement with C-suite has always become the default. Engaging at a lower level doesn't work. Getting the C-suite engaged and fully on board, and really talking to them about the whole concept of digital twin, creating that environment where they can experiment with data, they can understand and analyze how they can kind of manipulate their physical environment by understanding it through digital means. And from our perspective, we work with a number of providers, third parties and partners to help local authorities better understand what that data looks like and how they get the value from it.
Anything to add, Gary?
Yeah, so I think we should stop talking about sensors. I think we should start talking about data. One of the problems with sensors is that it's seen as an IT problem, or not problem, an IT project, and that often doesn't go down well with citizens. I think if citizens could see data like air pollution, water contamination, that sort of stuff, I think they would start to engage more with those negative aspects of the data that we're collecting to make improvements. I also think that there needs to be, certainly in the councils that I work in and within Wales, there needs to be more sharing and firm commitments to essentially a spend to save budget of spending on technology to create or generate the data in a meaningful way, and then to use that data to make changes and essentially save money, which everyone needs to do at the moment.
So I would love to stop talking about sensors and talk more about the data or the solution, but we cannot neglect the fact that we still need those sensors, right? And usually it's a very big hassle for the customer. So what do you think, Catherine?
I think the challenge with the Internet of Things is that there's capital expenditure and there's operational expenditure. And when we look in the government domain, they struggle with that. They understand the capital, but they don't understand that once you put sensors out there, they need maintenance. Look, the answer to that is to get ownership and buy-in with the importance of the use case. And I think we've been more successful at that, given sort of the journey that we've gone along to. And when a city is looking at filling a data gap, to also think about how they're going to manage that data. And once they've have a data management strategy, that becomes very clear. Now, I do know that cities all around the world are now deeply researching generative AI and edge computing as part of their framework. And of course, the legislation is struggling with that a bit. Because there's, of course, the privacy and data use legislation. So I think as practitioners in the space of IoT and smart cities, we just need to be open and understanding that sometimes the journey may take a bit longer, but if the city has a robust data strategy, that really does help. And I think that's the critical success factor, that if they want to go down this path of getting real-time data to fill data gaps, and that's part of their data strategy, then it's really a win-win.
Okay, thanks. I have one spontaneous question. So we didn't discuss this one front. We are talking about smart cities, right? And LoRaWAN is smart cities. And I'm going to ask the three of you to answer this question, starting with you, Catherine. Do you see a role for cellular as well in smart cities?
Yeah, so it's interesting how I don't see it any different. So just to be really clear, LoRaWAN is a complementary technology. It's a fit-for-purpose technology. If I look at our industrial customers, so we've got customers like major steel manufacturers, we've got port authorities, we've got mining customers. They have everything in the mix. I'll give you a really quick case study. One of our largest customers is a global steel manufacturing company. They have satellite, LTE, Wi-Fi, Zigbee, Cat-M1. they still struggle to get a signal at a motor on their plant. And so what I think is important is that all of the technologies work together. And because we're agnostic to the platform, they use Pi connector for their data connection. We will just send the data to the customer's platform of choice, whether that be, whatnot. And now we backhaul, obviously, via cellular. So cellular is really important to us because we provide the managed service, and we also backhaul via satellite. So I see it all complementary. I don't see it us versus them. It's all part of the mix. But great question.
Jason, in a few seconds.
It's what we do. We live and breathe multi-format networks. We broadband, we're Wi-Fi, we're LoRaWAN, and we'll use whatever technology is the right for the customer. We're an advocate of LoRaWAN, obviously, but more broadly, LP1 as a format and has always got a place alongside cellular and inside kind of fixed line, as it were. So from our perspective, our key default position is always the right tool for the right job, and that's something that we'll always advocate.
Thank you. Gary?
Yeah, obviously in rural areas like Wales, we do need cellular connectivity, mostly for the gateways. I'm not sure NB-IoT would work well for us at the moment because the telcos are having enough trouble turning off 3G and turning on 4G and 5G. But I think in the future, as Catherine said, it shouldn't really matter how the data gets back. It's the data that's important.
Sounds promising. So we've reached the end of this session. Thanks. I really enjoyed it, and I've learned a lot of new stuff.
Thank you.
Thanks, Afzal.
Looking forward to the next one.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.